every speaker before me, and their talks were brilliant, and I learned from them. Also regarding the latest speaker who spoke about the Assyrian people in Iraq and the suffering, when she mentioned that when she tried to do something for her, and many people didn't want to help because they didn't want to be labeled or called Islamophobes. I would like to tell her one message, that if standing beside her and supporting her will make me labeled as Islamophobe, then I am proud to be an Islamophobe. Let me just give you some general idea about my background. And I was born for a secular family in Egypt. My father was an orthopedic surgeon. He was a communist and atheist. And my mother was a very liberal French teacher. And we had no idea about religion. And my upbringing was really not religious at all. Around the age of maybe 16, I started to think about the concept of God and creation when I was studying the structure and function of the DNA molecule. I literally found God in the DNA molecule. And this was the beginning of the story. And I had such motivation toward God, and I wanted to do something for Him. And I have to admit that my energy was directed incorrectly by a radical group in our medical school that took all this energy to serve God just in a direction of hatred and the desire to cause harm to others. So the desire to serve God here was for me like nuclear energy. You can give light to a city with it, and you can destroy a city with it. So for them it was the thinking of destruction, the desire to destroy, to hate, to suppress the others. It was actually, I can tell you honestly, the two brainwashing techniques that were used with me initially was suppression of my critical thinking and the suppression of my human conscience. Initially, I will never forget the first time I walked with someone to pray in the medical school. His name was Mukhtar. And he said to me one phrase, I will never forget it. He said to me, look, Tariq, my real name is Tariq, Tawfik is the one for security reasons I'm using. He said to me, your al-aqlu al-fikru kufr. Al-fikr in Arabic, like F-K-R, means to think. Kufr, K-F-R, same letters but different arrangement, means to become an infidel. The message was simply, if you started to think, you will become an infidel. Not only that, he added a very interesting thing to me. He said to me, your brain is just like a donkey. A donkey in the Arab culture represents stupidity. So it was very insulting, but he said to me, your brain is just like a donkey. The donkey can help you reach the palace of the king, but once you reach the palace of the king, or Allah Almighty, or Islam, will you take your donkey inside the palace, or you leave it outside? I said to him, I leave it outside. And I was welcomed to join them. The second thing in my brainwashing was suppression of my human conscience. Just teaching me things in the way of if it is halal or permissible. You know the word halal, like halal meat, and haram means not permissible. When they taught me things as if it is halal for me, I'm allowed to do it, then gradually I lost my ability, really, my human conscience become unable to decide if something is good or bad. Because if it is acceptable by Allah Almighty, then it is halal, then I can't do it. Stoning of women is accepted by Him, then it's okay to stone women. Beheading non-Muslims or killing them or declaring war in them is halal, then it's okay for me. So it's gradual suppression of my human conscience. Even my normal human conscience would reject, for example, beating my wife, for example, but they can teach you that it is halal. Allah Almighty allowed it for you. So you gradually lose the ability to use your human conscience. And let me share with you something very interesting in this. I see this and the opposite of the way Jesus used to teach his disciples. If you see the parables of Jesus, he used to make people think, not just telling them what's correct and what's incorrect. He asked people, for example, who is your relative? Who is your neighbor? When he gave him the story of the guy who helped him, he didn't tell him the answer. He let the guy think to choose the answer. And he said to them one word, or to us, or to the whole world, one phrase that really, that was the opposite of what they teach, which was, what does it profit a man if he gained the whole world and loses his own soul? This was the best phrase that my father himself, even though he was an atheist, used to put it on his desk. I remember it. He was in his hospital, and he was an atheist, his name was Muhammad, and this was on his desk everywhere he goes to hospital. He was at the high level, and this was on his desk. What does it profit a man if he gained the whole world and loses his own soul? Let me now move to another dimension. The other dimension is, let us talk about the problem that we face today, because this is one of the problems that if you ignored it, it will ignore you. It will not ignore you. In other words, if you decided not to do something about it, they will do something about you. They will attack you. They will cause trouble to you. They can annihilate, use nuclear weapons against you, or chemical weapons, or biological weapons. So this is not one of the problems that you can say, I'm not interested to be engaged in it. We don't have this luxury. Okay? They simply prepare to attack us, and we cannot afford just ignoring it. You can ignore it as you wish, but this problem will not ignore you. It came to us in New York in September 11th. In Madrid train bombing, in London, in Indonesia, recently in Belgium, and desire to attack nuclear reactor. Everywhere from Nidal Hassan in Fort Hood massacre to California, San Bernardino recently, everywhere. They are not ignoring us. You can ignore them as you wish. No trouble at all. But this does not guarantee you any security. Ignoring them is not a strategy. Just as simple as that. Let me start by the Islamic culture and how I see it, because I feel it's unfair to put all Muslims in one category. And I really like the previous speakers when they talked about different types of Muslims. So I will tell you how I see it, okay, from a real reality point of view. I see the Muslim culture as 5 circles, one inside the other. You know the bullseye circles, this one. At the periphery, just imagine it with me. You have the cultural Muslims. Someone called Muhammad or Fatima, and he just lives his life as anyone else and enjoy everything, and he celebrates the equivalent to the Christmas, maybe in Islam or Ramadan, not more. That's fine. The inner group, the one inside, this is cultural Muslim. The inner one is ritual Muslims. Those people who want to care about doing the prayers, fasting, they don't want Sharia law, they don't want to force others on their belief system, and they are generally okay. The inner group, the third one, are the theological Muslims who study Sharia and Islamic theology and want to implement Sharia rules, such as killing apostates, beating women, stoning women to death, declaring wars on non-Muslims to subjugate them to Islam. And this comes here at the theological level. But this group do not use violence against the other to implement their views. They simply believe that this is the best model they want to achieve. And this by itself is a threat. Because currently you don't see a problem. But once their number reaches certain threshold, you will start to see the problems. It is one of the problems that you don't see, like cancer grows for thousands and thousands of cells, and you don't have symptoms. But the problem when it starts to cause symptoms, it can be relatively very late. Okay? So this is one of the things here. The theological Muslims are not an imminent threat today, but their number by itself, with the values of democracy and the ballot system, they can succeed just by their numbers. Then you have the inner group, smaller one, the radicals. They are the ones who want to use force against others to enforce or implement their religious values. Like they don't want you to drink alcohol, you are not permitted by force. And women have to put the hijab, for example. So they use violence and force to implement their religious values upon the others. Then the innermost groups are the jihadists, who explode and do suicide bombing and all what you know. And to illustrate this briefly, if we invited some people to a party to dinner tonight, let us say, and we have Muhammad or Fatima coming to the party, if Muhammad simply said, or Fatima enjoyed everything like everyone else in the party, drank some wine, let's say, danced, no difference between us, that's fine, that's typically culture Muslims, seems okay. If Muhammad or Fatima said, excuse me for 5 minutes, I will just go outside to pray and we'll come back to celebrate everything else as usual with you. That is typically a ritual Muslims who just wanted to do the ritual and come back. He was not offended by anything, he didn't cause trouble. If Muhammad said, how come you serve wine here? I'm not happy with this, I will leave, and he left with anger. Then Muhammad is typically the theological Muslim. He didn't use any violence, but it's starting to be a friction. If Muhammad took the bottle of wine and broke it, then Muhammad is the radical Muslim. If Muhammad exploded the whole area, then you will know up there he was the jihadist. As simple as that. So this is the Islamic culture. So the question now is, what went wrong in the last few decades that changed the Muslim culture from predominantly culture and ritual Muslims to an increasing numbers of radicals and jihadists? What happened? Or as Professor Bernard Lewis, if you know him, he has a book with this name, and he asked me in person this question, what went wrong? And I can tell you what went wrong in simple 3 essential steps. And I witnessed this personally. It's not something I read about. I witnessed it. The first thing was, if you went to see the map of the Middle East, you will see an area called Saudi Arabia, which was called Hijaz, okay? And there was a form of Islam there, or is a form of Islam that is very suppressive to the other. It does not accept the other to exist. No Christians existed in Saudi Arabia, no Jewish tribes or individuals, no churches, no synagogues, no art, no music, suppression of women, stoning to death. Every negative thing you see from ISIS today was practiced there, or is practiced there. And you have another form of Islam that was, you can say, mixed form of Islam, mystical form of Islam, whatever you call it, Sufi Islam, whatever, but it was in North Africa, Iraq, Syria, and this part, that allowed some element of freedoms. Women were not so suppressed. Stoning was not something that's well known. Christians and Jews existed. Someone talked today about, for more than 1,500 years, churches existed in the Middle East. But they didn't exist in the Hijaz area. That is important to recognize here, the geography here. So it existed, yes, but not in the areas that practice certain form of Islam with very literal understanding of the religion. So what happened in the late 70s, when Saudi Arabia became wealthy, we started to say, look how Allah blessed them with all this money and oil, because of what? Because they practice this form of Islam. They practice Sharia law. If we practiced it like them, if we followed their form of Islam, Allah will bless us like them. This is how many of us started to think. And this was the beginning. We started to import this way of Islam, which gradually replaced our previously relatively moderate understanding of the religion. I cannot say it was perfect, because Jews and the Christians were in several times in history there were also suppressed, but not to that they existed. It's completely different from Saudi Arabia when you see no churches, no synagogues. They don't burn churches and synagogues in Saudi Arabia because they simply do not exist there. Simply they do not exist. They burn it in places where they exist. They want to make it exactly like this Hijaz area. So what happened? This was the first step. The spread of Wahhabism, or as some people called it, the Petro-Islam, that was related to petrol or oil. The second step was the following. We changed the understanding of the concept of jihad. This was typically in Egypt, but by our Islamic radical groups in general, not me myself, but by the leaders of these groups. Let me explain this point. Jihad, according to Sharia books, and by the way, this is not my opinion, okay? This is what Sharia books teach today, not yesterday, today. And I always challenge people to bring one single approved Islamic textbook that teaches the opposite. Okay? So jihad in Sharia books, as it is taught, it is a form, typically a form of war that can be either against someone attacking you or to spread the religion. And in this process, you offer three options to the unbelievers. Like what ISIS is doing. ISIS is simply applying this Sharia law. Offering people three options. Either to become a Muslim, to convert to Islam, subjugate, or to pay humiliating tax to us called jizya while you are on your knees, or you will be killed and beheaded. Not only that, your women will be taken as sex slaves. This happened throughout North Africa in the Islamic conquests and invasions, and it is what is written today, what is taught today in, unfortunately, the so-called moderate Islamic organizations. That is the disaster. This is what's being taught till this moment. ISIS is simply taking this into practice. Nothing more. And that is why it's vital to understand who is our real enemy. Is it only ISIS? Or the radical groups? Or the ones who teach them to hate? Or the ones who teach them to use violence? So we need here to define who is our enemy. This is the first step in success. So when it comes to the aggravating the third step, so we took jihad as a principle, as a concept, and we made it at individual level. So jihad was simply declaring wars on non-Muslims to spread to and offer them the three options. And it was violent concept, but it was at a nation level. It was not a personal level. So if I wanted to do jihad as a young Muslim 1,000 years ago, I was not supposed to attack you personally. I was supposed to join the Islamic army to attack the Roman Empire or America or whatever. So it was traditional warfare. An army against an army. We simply changed the level of jihad in the last few decades. And we made it a personal form of violence. So instead of waiting for the Muslim nation to declare war on America, or the Christians, or the Jews, or whatever, or the Muslims who do not agree with us, we took it to our hands. We decided to do it individually. And we used several verses from religious texts can justify everything. We used a verse from the Quran that says, فَقَاتِلْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ لَا تُكَلَّفْ إِلَّا نَفْسُكَ, which means fight for the cause of Allah. You are only responsible for yourself. So we took this verse and other hadith of Prophet Muhammad and we changed the level of jihad from a nation responsibility to individual responsibility. In this new concept, I will no longer wait for the Islamic Ummah or nation to declare war in America. I will go attack Americans individually. And that was very significant. And this can explain to you what you see today globally, how individuals can do this evil at a personal level. After this significant change in our culture, we adopted the Wahhabi form of Islam. Then we changed the level of jihad to make it personal. The phenomena spread all over the world via different mechanisms, via the internet, via your wonderful immigration policies, And via many other ways, it is spread all over the globe. So the problem that was dormant in certain area and was at the national level changed completely to become individual against individuals. And not only that, it is spread all over the globe through the internet. I mean here the ideology. The ideology that made someone like Nidal Hassan in Florida, he did his crime and attack on his fellow innocent citizens because he was inspired by Al-Awlaqi in Yemen through the internet. So you are talking here about a phenomenon that became global because of the technology. And this is very worrying, by the way, because if the ideology of ISIS and jihadists continues like this, while the advances in technology continues as well, then in the next 10 years or 20 years, you will likely have this ideology coupled with extremely lethal technology and weapons that can cause massive destruction to our world. So we have to be very careful that we either destroy ISIS or stop the technological developments. And I guess we have no other option but the former. When it comes to the factors that aggravate this problem. Look, I'm a medical doctor by profession, and for me, when I see a diabetic person, the blood glucose is elevated, I always think, what is the cause of the elevation? What aggravates it? Is it obesity? Is he using certain medication like diuretics, for example? Or it's something else? So isn't he taking enough dose of the drug? So I have to see what are the aggravating factors. There are many, but let me define some of them for you now briefly. One of them is the failure to define the problem. When I came to the United States around 6.5 years ago, I was sitting with two people. They were arguing. One was liberal, one was conservative, and they were talking about if some Islamic group was moderate or radical. And they were fighting with one another. And I said to them, do you have any definition for what you are talking about? Do you have a definition for the meaning of the word radical? What does it, what are the parameters to measure radicalism? And they looked at me and said, no, we don't. And I said to them, it's exactly like, I'm from Egypt, you know, someone telling me, or if the pyramid is, I'm asking him, is the pyramid big or small? What does it mean? It can be big compared to my size, and it can be small compared to the size of a galaxy. So as long as, we can fight forever, by the way, we can fight forever. That's why the liberals and conservatives are fighting. If they spend some time to define parameters for the problem, they will unite immediately about this. That's why I define the problem in what I call the ABC's test for radical Islam. It's available in my website and also in the book if someone wanted it. It's simply, I try to put parameters for certain things. If you believed in these things, if you stood for them, and if you taught them in your educational systems, then I'm sorry, I have to call you radical. And you will agree with me, you will see these things, what are they? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A, apostate killing. Killing someone because he converted from Islam. The concept of killing someone because he doesn't believe in your belief system is the root cause of a lot of evil. Because it justifies killing a human being just because he does not exactly believe in your view. And this is what ISIS is doing exactly. So the concept of killing apostate is taken by ISIS and implemented at a different level. B, barbaric treatment of women, like beating women, stoning women to death. And some people say, but Sharia is different. You have scholars that have different views about Sharia. Absolutely correct. But do you know the four main schools of jurisprudence, when they differ about these ABCs or something like the stoning, they don't have difference about if you will stone or not stone. They all agree on the stoning till death. Except the difference is simply the size of the stones, for example. Big or small. So when people say they have difference, yes, they have difference. But not about the fundamental concept of these ABCs. And this is my real war here. A, apostate killing. B, barbaric treatment of women. C, calling Jews pigs and monkeys. It's very common in the Muslim world to have scholars and to have it in the books and to have it taught to dehumanize a whole nation. One day I was speaking in Dearborn, Michigan. And you know Dearborn, Michigan. And there was around 900 people gathering, and it was a mix of different faiths and not ordinary people. And when I started to talk about the ABC, some guy who was from Senegal, he was an imam, was tall, and he came, approached me, interrupted my speech. And he said to me, Dr. Hamid, why you mention these ABCs? I am a moderate imam. I participate in interfaith dialogue. I have Jewish friends here in the society. So why do you talk about these ABCs? I said to him, look, imam, would you mind, instead of telling me how moderate you are, to prove this to me and to the audience now? And everyone was silent. And I said to him, would you mind, imam, to invite me and some of our Jewish friends and the brothers and sisters who are sitting with us tonight to your mosque next Friday prayer, and instead of telling us how moderate you are, just stand in front of everybody in your mosque and say it clearly, loudly, and unambiguously that Jews are not pigs and monkeys. Will you do this, imam? He didn't say a word. He didn't utter a letter. And he returned back to his seat in silence. So that is the problem. It is so easy to claim, I am a moderate. Okay, prove it to me. So when Sheikh Al-Azhar, the head of Al-Azhar University, for example, speak about moderate Islam, okay, Sheikh Al-Azhar, are you with killing the apostates or not? And you have to put the questions yes or no answers. That's the only way to have, because it's getting really crazy. People teach these values, and when ISIS implement them, they blame ISIS. Oh, ISIS is not, they are not good Muslims. Why, instead of blaming ISIS, why don't you criticize ISIS? Why don't you criticize the fundamental values of ISIS, these ABCs, for example? ABC, D, declaring wars on non-Muslims to spread the religion after giving 3 options. We mentioned them, Islam or jizya or killing. E, enslavement of female war prisoners. When I mentioned this years ago, 7 years ago now, I was here, many people said to me, oh, that's unbelievable. There's no one have female war prisoners as slaves. You see them every day today in Iraq and Syria. It's happening, my brothers and my sisters. It's happening. Enslaving of female war prisoners and taking them as sex slaves. F, fighting Jews before end days and killing all of them. And G, gay killing. Whatever your view about this sexual orientation is, but the concept of killing and hanging them to death and pushing them from mountains and breaking their heads in such a brutal way is completely unacceptable. So the first thing was the failure to define the problem. The second, in my view, is our political correctness. Look, I'm again a doctor. If I analyze a case or a pathology slide and I realize there is cancer, but because I want to be politically correct and nice to the person, I said to him, you have only common cold. Will you consider me an honest, professional person? The same for security. When you discuss this whole issue of radical Islam and all this stuff, if the problem was Islam, then you have to say the problem is Islam. If the problem is the understanding of Islam, then you have to say it is the understanding. If it has nothing to do with Islam, say it. But you have to be honest. You cannot begin your research by putting in the assumption that it cannot be the religion. So what if it was? What would you do? It's like starting the analysis of the pathology slide while saying, oh, no, it cannot be cancer. Because I want to be politically correct and nice to people. No, we know very well religions has been used in a very vicious way throughout history, so why not now? What's different now? Thank God we don't have this political correctness during the dark ages of Europe, or otherwise we would have remained in these dark ages forever. And as my wife put it brilliantly one day, she was cooking something, I remember, and she came to me, and President Obama was speaking and talking about the value of tolerance in the American society. She is with us tonight. And she said to me, President Obama said, we became the beacons for liberty and democracy because we are tolerant. We show tolerance. And she came with some element of anger on her face, and I can't forget this moment. And she said to me, "That's absolutely wrong." I said to her, "How?" She said to me, "That it is the opposite." I said again, "How?" She said to me, "Had America been tolerant of slavery, slavery would exist today in America. You became beacon for liberty and democracy not because you were tolerant, but because you were intolerant. You were intolerant to discrimination against women. That's why now women has more rights. You became intolerant to anti-Semitism. That's why Jewish people have better life now in America than before. You became intolerant to slavery. That's why you ended slavery. It was not your tolerance that made you beacon for liberty and democracy. It was your, Maha said, intolerance. It was your intolerance." This is a painful reality. It reminds me as a medical doctor with the immune system. Every day we have 5 to 7 cancer cells. That is medicine. It's not something I'm inventing. Go to any pathology books, that is what is written. Every day, human body develops 5 to 7 cancer cells. But what happened? Because our immune system, that normally has to show tolerance to our body, in this particular case with cancer, it does not show tolerance. It kills them by T killer lymphocytes. It's called exactly like this. If the immune system started to show tolerance to cancer cells, you know what will happen. Cancer will immediately start to spread, and its game is over or still too late. So we need to understand some element of wisdom here in using the word tolerance. The other factor that many people also thought of was under the banner of political correctness is trying to find justifications, saying it is poverty, it's lack of education, it is the Arab-Israeli conflict, it's lack of democracy. Okay, if these factors, whatever they are, were the true cause of the problem, why then, for example, the non-Muslims who live under the same socio-economic and political circumstances do not develop terrorism or suicide bombing? Immigrants in Europe, we have people from Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, Christians who are immigrants. If the political circumstances or poverty are the cause of the problem, why these non-Muslim communities did not develop the same problem? If there is no specific problem in what I can call understanding of Islam, to avoid any trouble, let us talk about the understanding of the religion, which I will address very shortly to conclude the discussion. So what I'm saying here is trying to postulate things like the Arab-Israeli conflict as the cause of the problem. And my comment was simply, are you trying to convince me that killing more than 150,000 innocent Algerians in Algeria by the radical Islamic groups, and Shia killing Sunni in brutal way, and Sunni destroying Shias and mutilating their dead bodies, and Salafists exploding the Sufi mosques in Pakistan, is this also because the Arab-Israeli conflict? If we agree together, statistically speaking, that majority of victims of the radical Muslim are Muslims, then are Muslims killing one another because of the Arab-Israeli conflict? Look, as long as we do not define the problem, we will never solve it. So let me now move to solutions. When we talk about a solution for the problem, again, doing nothing is not a strategy, is not going to help you. And also doing something is meaningless unless it is correct. So for example, if I want to reach my destination, which is to solve or end this disease of radicalism, if this is my destination, and my destination to go to some place, if I did nothing, I will not reach that place. If I drove a car, again, it's meaningless until I drove it in the correct direction. And that's what we need to learn. It's not simply trying to solve it and having banners and titles. It is the content of the material that can solve it. I will give you some few real examples of how we need to approach this problem. We tried the military approach for years, and just recently there was, on Fox News, there was a statistical data coming from one of the universities of the US, and it's showing how terrorism was going from the 70s like this, and in the last 8 years or 9 years, it goes, you can see the curve shooting up like this. So obviously it doesn't need a rocket scientist to realize that we are not using correct approach. Otherwise, it should have went down. It doesn't need a rocket scientist. All what you need is to be honest. See the curve and see if our approaches are effective. So repeating the same approaches again and again, it reminds me with Albert Einstein comment when he defined the stupidity or insanity by repeating the same thing again and again and expecting different results. So let me just give you a touch on how this phenomena need to be approached strategically. And what I'm giving you here is a drop of an ocean, just to give you some idea, okay? Even smaller than a drop. We need to look to the problem at 3 stages. You have the militant stage, someone carrying a weapon, okay? You have a pre-militant stage, someone radical who wants to do harm, but he's not yet carrying a weapon. And some normal individuals at the periphery here, okay? So you have 3 components here. You need to work at the 3. And maybe someone saying, oh, what's the value of working at the level of normal people? I'll tell you what's the value. Again, my medical touch here coming back again. You remember poliomyelitis? Polio. How polio was eradicated? Is it because we cured the ones who have the disease, or because we worked at the normal individuals to prevent the spread of the disease? It's the same here. We need a polio approach. Polio approach will be very helpful here to work at the level of normal people through certain approaches to prevent the spread of radicalism. So now we have 3 items. The militant, you need to use kinetic power against them. But when you use this power, you need also to use the approach of antibiotics. When you use antibiotics, you either give full dose of antibiotics or don't use antibiotics. Because using half dose can only bring resistant strains. So as simple as that. So number 1, with the militants, you need weapons. You need kinetic power, you need force. With the radicals are another story. They don't carry weapons and they are interested to cause harm. What prevents people from doing crazy things? Usually the negative reinforcement. Like, for example, if a child touches something hot, the pain, the immediate pain, makes this child avoiding this hot thing again. This is called negative reinforcement in the brain, in the mind. For the radicals, radical Muslims are very different story from many people in human history. Like the Nazi Germany, for example, the people around Hitler wanted to survive. That's why when they realized they are losing the war, they surrendered because they want to survive. The Russians, for example, in the Cold War, wanted to survive also, so they didn't start attacking the US because the US can also erase them from the map, mutually asserted destruction, and this was enough deterrent. So the concept of a brain deterrent, psychological deterrent, is essential to prevent the evil people from doing their acts. The same, what ended the war with Japan? The Emperor of Japan surrendered when he realized he and all other people will die. So death for them was sufficient deterrent. But for the Islamic radicals, they want to die. So this is simply not a deterrent for them. Okay? And that is crucial. There are many other approaches. I cannot reveal them. I have in fact, I have a whole strategy of more than 120 different tactics that need to be implemented in different ways to deter them, to prevent them from thinking in doing anything, okay? So to use effective deterrent with the radicals is the key. So with people who have weapons, use weapons. With the radicals, you need effective psychological deterrents. And now you have the internet. They are using it better than us. We can use it better than them if we know what to do. But if we don't know what to do, it's another problem. The third group are the normal people. What to do here? There are two things that I will briefly mention. One is educational, a theological one, and one is non-theological form of education, a form of changing the way of thinking that leads radicalism. Because you can find radicalism in different faiths and beliefs. Even if the faith teaches peace and love and harmony, some radicals can still develop because the way of thinking itself. So when it comes to the theological level, I'll give you an example. Just fast look. This is the last thing, by the way, this part. If the example here is when I was young, I remember I put it at different levels of interpretation. Level 1, who are those infidels? And I said it's only limited to those during Mecca time. And what is the evidence of this? It's limited to people during Mecca or the early stage of Islam. It is because it used the suffix al or there before the word. It's like saying to you, I'm going to a White House or going to the White House. That can significantly change the meaning and specify it. If you ask me, how can I get the book? Then you are talking about, for example, this book. So, because we talked about it. So the suffix there can significantly change the meaning of the violent verses of the Quran to make them limited in time and the place. The third level of interpretation. Why that the Quran was against those infidels? Because they kicked the early Muslims from their homes, they burned them alive. This is what is written in the Quran exactly. The fourth level of interpretation, what is the common theme of these actions is simply discrimination against a small religious minority. Back then it was the early Muslim believer because of their religious beliefs. Then what can we learn today from this? Is not to discriminate against small religious minorities, otherwise we will be exactly like those infidels. If I read this interpretation when I was young, I wouldn't have continued in the radical groups, believe me. But this interpretation was not existent. It just existed 2.5 years ago. That is the problem. And it's the current interpretation, I cannot say almost all, I can with confidence say all teaches violent principles, sadly. It doesn't mean individual Muslims are violent, but the current interpretations, unfortunately, are violent. And if someone wants to prove me wrong, it is so easy, but it's very difficult as well. It's so easy because the principle bring one single approved Islamic reference that stands clearly and unambiguously against the ABCs that I mentioned to you earlier. One single approved book, or one major Islamic scholar of the top Islamic organizations that can stand in public and against the ABCs. Bring one book approved by Al-Azhar or Saudi Arabia that stands against one item of the ABCs, not two. It's nothing. And I challenged many of them, they don't have it. Simple. So this is at the theological level. There are ways to reinterpret things and it's already happened. You just need to move forward. The second is changing the thinking process. And one of the problems in the thinking process that leads to radicalism, I mentioned one example here and finalize, is the concept of being judgmental to others. When I start to judge you as being bad, then I start to hate you, and then hatred breeds violence later on. So the very first step is really hatred and being judgmental to others. To teach this, there is another system that I created, an educational system that works at the level of the thinking process. It has many examples, more than 60 examples that I'll give you an example. I draw a river for them. I call it the river of the truth and the end or righteousness. And the end of the river, point 100 is the point of righteousness. You see two guys, one at point 95 and one at point 5. The one at point 95, many people will say he's righteous person, he's perfect, he's very close to the final step. And many people will say the guy who is at point 5, oh, he's a bad guy, he's not righteous, he's too far from the righteousness. And then if you knew that the guy at point 95, point 9 had started already from point 100 and is moving backwards, and the guy at point 5 has started at point 0 and is moving forward, then you start to think differently. And through this educational system with visual aids, with making them participate in the questions and answer, and could be done via advertising on TV, so you can completely change the thinking traits that leads to radicalism, such as absolutism, judgmentalism, literalism, and many others. And the last thing I would like to share with you is very few words from my heart. Because I decided one day to remember a guy who was the first person, and always remember his memory. He was the first guy to be beheaded by the radical Islamic groups. His name was Daniel Pearl. He was a journalist in the Wall Street Journal. And I was in New Zealand back then, and I read how he was beheaded in such a brutal way. I will never forget his smile, and I will never forget how he stood for his principles when he died while saying, yes, I am a Jew. And it just touched my heart. And I woke up, remember, and I went to the kitchen. We have a table there, and I started to write some few words that I would like to share with you, and this will be the end of the lecture today. I said to him, and I will quote it in Arabic, put it in Arabic first and translate. أقسم أني لن أترك اسمك يمحى من ذاكرة التاريخ. I swear that I will never ever let your name be erased from the memory of history. وسأكتب اسمك بالدمع. And I will write your name with my tears. وسأحفر اسمك في الصخر. And I will carve your name at the top of the mountains so that everybody will see it. فما قتلوك وحدك يا دانيال. They haven't only killed you, O Daniel. بل قتلوا الحق وقتلوا الحب وقتلوا أحلام الأجيال. But they killed the meaning of love, the meaning of the truth and the dreams of the coming generations. قسما بأنينك وقت الذبح. I swear with your groaning pains when they beheaded you. وبدمع طفلك في الرحم. And I swear with the tears of your child when it was still in the womb or uterus. أني لن أنساك يا دانيال. That I will never ever forget you, Daniel. إن قتلوك لأنك يهودي. If they have killed you because you are a Jew, فأنا يهودي منذ الآن. Then I am a Jew from now on. Thank you so much. God bless you all, and God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of that. What would be a great resource for our fellow Americans to really educate themselves about the true Islam? Because what they purchase and read is such a superficial Islam that is forced down their throat. That's one question. The other one is, how do we combat the Islamization of our universities?
That's very complex question. Thank you for the questions. The first one is, look, I'm in a position where I'm not that kind of people to recommend my own stuff or books. So I'm having difficult really to recommend something. I will leave it to others. But I can say to you, go to the Institute of World Politics website, and there is around 2.5 hours. Remember that talk, Paul, on their site for me, discussing the whole issue in much more details, with illustrations, with graphics. So this is what I would recommend. And to fight Islamization in the in the schools, in the universities. Simply, you define the enemy not as the Muslims themselves, but as the ABCs. And you put clear questionnaire for the leaders of the mosques, like what I did with this mosque leader, for example, to show if he is truly moderate, let them denounce the ABCs. The moment he denounces them, believe me, I will consider him my brother. But as long as he believes in such barbaric values, he believes that women should be taken as sex slaves in wars, and then come and say ISIS does not represent Islam, this schizophrenia I cannot tolerate. So I believe the best way is to be truthful and focus on the ABCs. And if you needed any help, please contact me anytime. My email is my name, Tawfik Hamid, @gmail.com. So it's easy. Yeah.
I have a question over here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. And I often tell fellow Christians in America that, there's lots of things we need to do about Islam, but we can't ultimately change it. We need people from inside the faith to do that, and you're that guy. You're one of those guys.
I'm
so
trying.
I appreciate that. I'm curious, this may seem like a strange question, but are there certain centers of learning, like you always hear about Al-Azhar and other sort of big, Islamic academies? In Orthodox Judaism, I live in Riverdale, New York, in the Bronx, and it's a poor comparison because it's not at all similar. But there's a yeshiva in Riverdale that's known for being sort of the liberal version of Orthodox Judaism. People who want to sort of look at the faith from that perspective go to YCT.
Yeah.
Are there sort of alternative centers that have gravitas, whether in the Arab world or beyond?
There are individuals who are now trying, and I can tell you honestly, they are increasing in numbers, especially with the internet that was used by to radicalize people. The same internet was used also to expose the evil of ISIS and the radicals and the slavery and the beheading, all this stuff. So you have many people revolting against this traditional understanding of the religion. And you will actually be surprised to know that we have millions of atheists now in Egypt and in the Arab world. So we are talking about, the young, especially the young generations. So what I can tell you that there are individuals, but they are trying at individual personal levels, like myself and others and here and there, but they are working against the stream individually. Most of them are not supported enough. So it's all individual efforts that can be magnified significantly and change completely the game. But hopefully this can come to be more organized. I'm hoping so. I always believe that, as I always say, fighting terrorism in brainstem, here in the brain. And one of my op-eds that I wrote a couple of years ago, or a bit more, maybe 3 years ago, was using broadband to fight terrorism. So there are the beginning of the change happening. So in the past it was unidirectional. Most are going toward the center, radicalism. Now I can see it is bidirectional. There are people who are going toward ISIS, and there is a momentum that's going out even outside the circles, okay? So this momentum, if it is supported well, and the other one is suppressed effectively, we can change human history. I believe so. Yes.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I appreciate your comments very much. Do you have any thoughts for us on two very closely related tactical questions? The first is that today, and you made reference to this, Saudi Arabia is financing Wahhabism around the world. So the reason that Wahhabism, as you were saying, has spread is partially because Saudi Arabia cut a deal with the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely.
And they forced out all of the Sufis
no doubt
in Africa and around the world.
Yes.
So you have that issue of the financing, and then you also have an analogous thing in history where I understand that there was a movement like the one that you're describing soon after, as Islam began to interact with Greece. There was
the Mu'tazilites.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that it was ultimately defeated.
It was defeated. It was just.
So here's my concern is how can we make sure that today's like you are not defeated by Saudi Arabia, which is paying to propagate the opposite point of view?
They thank you truly for the question, and I have to tell you honestly, many of the people who are standing against radical Islam, not only doing it as a personal effort, but they are a kind of people who will not go to others and ask for funds or support. They are a kind of people who are just doing it because they will be very hesitant to go to others to ask help. And that's one of the problems, to be honest with you. And the only way really is to try to find them and make sure that they are in the right direction and try to go and support them without waiting for them to ask you. I know this is not the Western system, but if you waited, the whole world is losing. They are not going to ask you, and so it's mutual benefit here. So this, I have to tell you honestly, majority of them are of this kind. They will do it, they will try to fight, and many of them are actually, there is a guy called Islam al-Bahiri in Egypt, and I'm sad to say now, he is in prison now. Because the Wahhabists, you have President al-Sisi is a great man, I believe so. He's really for reform, but he has a lot of resistance at the street level with the judges, with the legal system. They don't want the change. You know, when you have a leader who is good, but the system around him hasn't changed enough to be at that level, so the legal system is impeding his efforts. So they put people, the reformers like Islam al-Bahiri in prison. So thanks for the question, but that's the best way is to find them, try to do some research, I'm sure you will know how, find these people and go offer them your support. Don't wait for them to come to you, they will not.
Dr. Hamid, I remember a couple months ago you and Dr. Zuhdi Jasser and others put out some statement, a public statement that was in the media. It seemed to be a coalition of reform-minded.
Absolutely.
Can you speak about that?
Of course.
What was it and what's been the impact?
There is a wonderful person called Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. He's a friend of mine, and he's Muslim and very moderate person, and he believes in separation of church and or mosque and the state. He recently started a group of people who are like-minded reformers and who wants to make change. With each one of them has different capacity in different sense, and we met together here in Washington. And unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to continue the whole thing, but I'm part of it. It's called Muslim Reform Movement. And they came several times on the news. And I don't know yet if they are an organization or not. To be honest with you, that when I met with them, I met with just some group of people, but I don't know if they have started a specific form of organization or not. I'm not aware. But I'm certainly on their mission, and what they happened, they took the concept of the ABCs, but they actually, Zuhdi added certain things and made the language maybe better, and he created some form of a statement that if you signed it, you can be considered a moderate. If you refused, then don't blame us if considering you a radical. And he went to several mosques, they went to several mosques to put this on the mosque to make sure that it reached them and to see the response. So the response was two parts. One, at the level of the media, they started to speak, and it's putting the radicals in a corner now, because there is some statement, and which was one of my dreams, really, to have something like the ABCs giving to Muslims to just to prove. If you're more moderate, sign it. If you don't sign it, then you are likely a radical. So Zuhdi Jasser and the Muslim Reform Movement started the process, and it's beginning. It's hard to see the real impact because the war is very big and multidimensional. It is global. So I can see this is the beginning. You know, when crystals surround around something, when we used to eat when I was young, some called sugar. I don't know in English what do you call it. This sugar thing, crystals together, and gather together. And I believe that this is the first crystal in this process. So it certainly needs maybe more push, more support, more things to happen. But thank you for raising the issue. It's a great movement, and I wish, I'm happy to do anything for them to move forward, certainly.
How has your perspective been received in the Middle East?
I'll tell you, before the so-called Arab Spring, okay, and for more than, just to let you know, I stood against radicalism more than 30 years ago. So it's not something after September 11 or anything. No, I was standing against it by myself, and my wife, with few people, more than 30 years. And I was fighting against or swimming against the stream, take it that way. Now I feel that I'm swimming with the stream to some extent, okay? So that is the difference. For example, to put it in statistical numbers, the Facebook that I created about the modern Quran interpretation, and it's a revolution in the way of understanding the religious text, which is a very difficult process, by the way. And I can say, if I put this Facebook to the Muslim world, to the Arab world, it's in Arabic, like 10 years ago, I wouldn't have had 50 people supporting it, and maybe 2 million swearing at me and saying negative things about me, okay? But now I have 2 million supporting it, liking it, and they probably want more. I recently also put it on a free app for them. I asked someone to do it for me. I paid him to make a free app for them so that everyone can have it available for all over the Arab world, and even here for people who speak Arabic. So this is the perspective. It changed significantly after the Arab Spring, because the Muslim Brotherhood, when they came to power in Egypt, they failed. They promised people that they will have every success once they came to power, because they represent God. And they failed. This was the beginning of it. And then the evil things of ISIS, which was spread all over the internet, also created, and the criticism for the theology of ISIS and the theology of the radical Islamic theology that infiltrated many of the religious institutes, if not all the religious institutes in the Middle East. I'm talking about the Islamic ones. The exposure of this evil in different forms make many people start to revolt. Some of the revolt make some of them becoming atheists. Some others try to find other interpretation for the religion, which was this interpretation for the Quran. So it depends, but I can say there is a beginning of momentum that I cannot say 100% it will succeed, but I can say if it is well supported, it will succeed. I believe so. The movement is strong. Yeah.
You had mentioned the word righteousness.
Yes.
One of your points. And I'm constantly surprised about how knowledgeable Arab and Muslim leaders are about our own history versus our knowing about theirs. And the word righteousness, what brought it to my mind was Teddy Roosevelt. He once said that if I must choose between peace or righteousness, I'll choose righteousness. Now my question is, does that resonate with any of the people that you know over there or interact with? Does that resonate in any positive way with them, knowing what it means to us by him saying that? Does that, because to me it means almost imputing of power. Do you think they would respect a leader with that kind of a mindset here in the United States, because obviously we don't have it now, to the point of being positive, going forward with the points in the way of attacking the terrorists that we now know?
So are you talking here about in the United States, not in the Arab world? Look, you know your people more than I know. I'm here for 6 years, so I have to be honest with you, I cannot give you a very accurate answer. But my gut feeling is that truth has power, innate power in it. And in different stages in human history, darkness tried to suppress light. But at the end, light will prevail. So I believe that probably if this statement was said to your people before they have seen ISIS and they have seen all this evil, maybe it could have meant completely different thing when they hear it today. And also for them, the definition of righteousness, I believe, need to be more clarified, because some people may mean righteousness in certain terms that would be more ritualistic, for example. And some other may mean righteousness in terms of showing your good deeds to the world so that the people sanctify the name of your Father in heavens. So righteousness can mean for someone praying more and more, and for someone else showing or doing good deeds to the world and humanity. So I believe defining here what is meant for them by righteousness, it could be a mix of both, but it's important for